I will open now the round table, and I will invite you to make questions to our three keynote speakers. And I will take even the questions from the chat. Yes, please. If you can read the question, because it's too small.
So we had one participant who was luckily able to ask questions. All the other ones are still shy, so if you want to participate, put them in the chat. We had a question for each one of the speeches, so I think I just start at the beginning. The question is from Hans-Rüdiger Kaufmann, and he asks, you, Sabina, Leopa, what do you think of applying cybernetic principles on natural system-based principles?
What do you think of applying, sorry?
Cybernetic principles, and then in brackets he put natural system-based principles.
Well, to be honest, I think right now the situation in which we're in is similar to the situation in which mythological heroes were in meeting the Hydra. So basically throw everything at it, and throw everything that has a chance to produce effects of scale and has a chance to produce basically a higher and higher uptake of nature-based solutions. So thinking in systems is extremely important. Thinking in different solutions is extremely important. Again, circling back to the Hydra question, the Hydra does not die if you cut a head off. The Hydra dies ultimately if you use arrows, if you use sword, if you use a strategy, if you use your nephew or a relative, and so on. So basically, it's the same thing with climate change and with the adaptation and mitigation measures for cities. What you want to do is to try as many strategies as possible in order to create linkages and to create let's say, economies of scale for these solutions, and to create cascading effects. So in this respect, yes, I do believe that's any suggestion is a good suggestion.
Just continue with the questions, or to the other
We
ones?
just take before the question online, then we go to the,
okay.
Because I see people are ready. We finish the questions online, and then we go to the floor. You go with the second question. I see a second question for the second speaker.
The second question is, what are the criteria for residential buildings to be regarded as cultural heritage?
Sorry?
The criteria.
The criteria for residential buildings to be regarded as cultural heritage.
No, actually it's a difficult question, and depends very much on the context and on the national context. So the decisions are taken differently, especially also depends on financial solutions and from political situation, and also actors involved in this. There is a tendency to include more and more users and residents in these decisions, but still there is a prevalence of the state actors that decide, and the decisions are different in the national context. So.
And to the last speaker, there are two questions. To what extent do you have scientific research on the benefits or drawbacks of the macro-regional Eurodelta?
Yeah, I think this is in development. As I said, there is not a big body of knowledge yet on that scale. It has to be built up. So that is exactly why we create those platforms, exchange. I mean, there is such a wealth of knowledge hidden in so many different institutes, research institutes, universities, throughout the Eurodelta, outside Eurodelta. And just by providing a platform, you start to see synergies, you start to see, aha, yeah, I came to the same conclusion more or less, So yeah, maybe we can start collaborating on presenting it as a case that could be also applied in other parts of the Euro Delta, you know, because with every discussion, people will say it is so contextual. If you want to adjust planning systems to each other, the feedback is always you can't because our context is too specific. Yes. Well, we find out these contexts are not so different within that functional area. But indeed, I think that the scientific community needs to step up its efforts to bring together that place-based science to demonstrate that regional collaboration, transnational, transregional collaboration has its merits within the broader scope of governance and sustainable development.
I think the last question perfectly adds to that. The last question is, what about a communication plan to create a Euro-Delta identity?
A communication plan, yes. Yeah, well, that is part of our effort to open the dialogue, and not in a closed way. The time that we just discussed this among, let's say, the small elite of people that are professionally working on that scale is done. We have seen that many young students, scholars are interested to exchange with others because there is so much to gain. The communication, well, we are trying to contribute our effort to awareness raising within the planning community, yes, but we will also have to reach out to the level of governance, the decision makers, to make sure that they feel also co-ownership in this story. And that will be a very, very difficult part. When it comes to communication with the public, I think that actually now we finally have the means to do much more than we ever could. I mean, thanks to modern IT, we are so much more digitally connected. We have seen this with our week of exchange, that people can perfectly collaborate purely online in creating ideas that they will never have had developed on their own. So there are ways even with mobile messaging that you can involve actually the larger public. We have to be very creative in finding ways, but I think we have to get away from the idea that there is only one way of communication that is really from top down. There is actually room for a much stronger bottom-up communication, yeah, or contribution.
Next question.
Thank you. Yes, I have. Am I allowed? No, not that close. So sorry. Am I allowed to take it off until I speak or not?
I don't
No,
hear.
okay, don't worry, then I take off my glasses. It's either or.
Introduce yourself, please.
Okay, hello, my name is Hanna Semze. I'm from Budapest, Hungary, and I'm a sociologist working at the Metropolitan Research Institute. I'm one of the managing directors. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I have a question specifically for Elena, because I also work a lot with urban development and heritage. And it was basically more a question or a comment that I really liked in your presentation, the way you emphasize this changing assumption of what is heritage, how something that's regarded as very recent or contemporary can be turned into heritage. This often ugly-looking post-socialist housing residences are like one example. But one point, what struck me was that there is actually a counter-tendency that says you want to involve the communities. And you specifically mentioned that people were often against it, partially because it costs, it raises their costs, partially because it revokes bad memories. It's sometimes, especially when the dictatorship was stronger, that's really a problem. So do you think these two notions can be aligned, or do you think this tension can be solved? That would be it.
It's a very interesting question and very difficult one because, yes, when we are talking about especially socialist heritage, we are talking about past which has a bad image, bad memories, and sometimes it's hated. And it is also difficult to be adapted to the new conditions, to the new economic and social and demographic conditions. And it's very contextualized. I mean, the decision, the approach of the people to this heritage is, for example, when we are looking in many German examples, the people willing to preserve it and also fight for this. In Russian context, it's totally different because everything related to the Soviet past is really hated. So it's hated even by professionals very often. So architects are against of the preservation of this socialist past. So it's a really challenging situation. Even we understand that a lot of examples are really valuable, and there is need, of course, to more education, to more discussion about this. But sometimes it's difficult to change the situation. It's very important comment. Thank you.
Well, thank you. As the day is coming, this long day is coming to an end slowly. Please let me first use the opportunity to say thank you to all the team of BOKU here. Gernot Stöglener, of course, but also the technical team. Fantastic. I think we never had such a good support in a conference. This was fantastic today, and I hope we can continue in this way in the next days. The other thing is, with the presentations, I mean, on the one hand, I could not be more happy after this day. On the other hand, I have to bring in one aspect, as we heard now, what we want as planners, what do we ask from participation, from politicians, from and I remember a discussion that we had with real estate developers 2 or 3 years ago at Technical University. We had 3 days of presentations from planners, and then the real estate people started to talk. Basically in the first sentence, it was about budget, it was about interest rate, it was about return on investment, and the question is, who pays for it in the end? Yeah? We can have a lot of wishes, but maybe we should search for more communication with business. Pietro Lorenz said it in his presentation, who actually builds the city. It's not the planners that build the city. You have to have the real estate investors, you have to have the developers in it, you have to have the business aspects and the business cases. And so maybe it's a stupid comment from me, because I should be very happy, and as a planner I can support everything that was said. But I think we have to look over the edge of our own world and have to focus more on those aspects. That's what I just wanted to comment. Okay.
Yes, I saw that you were provoking a lot of raising hands.
We need some discussion afterwards. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. I have now 2 comments.
The people without masks, otherwise we don't get the... Yeah, please.
That's very nice. Yes, thank you. My name is Matthias Hase. I'm a professor for building systems from the Zurich University of Applied Sciences. I have one question and one comment to my previous speaker. And the question was to Frank, the last presenter on the Euro Delta. You were mentioning that there is you want to contribute to the discussions regarding megapolis in other regions of the world. But I wonder, yeah, could you elaborate on this? Because I don't see immediately the same pressure as you can find in other mega cities like maybe Mexico City or some places like that, where you can see that the city development suffers from these dimensions in which it has grown. Whereas in the Euro Delta, I think so far everything is working quite well, and there are a lot of stakeholders, of course, but maybe you see other issues, or maybe you want to use it as a good example of regional development, or what are your plans? And before you answer, maybe I can give a quick comment that I'm a planner myself for 20 years, and I just changed my job last year under the pandemic, a very weird experience. And I'm now with the Institute of Facility Management. So I was seeking this, getting nearer to the real estate world and the people with the money, to talk with them about all the beautiful plans that we have and that are, to a certain extent, also necessary, and to clarify where the money should come from. But we can discuss this later. Thank you.
There was another question, I think. Yes, the gentleman. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, I think, yeah, good. Yeah, I'm Keo Bao. I'm from Stuttgart, Germany, and I think I go back to the topic of the heritage, the housing heritage. And I studied in Freiburg, like Germany, like a very nice town, and now I'm working in Stuttgart, not so nice, but very attractive because of the companies and job opportunities. There are a lot of social housing in German context, like high rises and very grand, and they are not really attractive like nowadays, for most of people. Of course, like in these two cities, if you have a house or a flat, you can sell it in the market without any problem, but they are less attractive. So this is the situation in good cities, so to say, and my question is, does it actually make sense to keep these buildings as heritage, and for those not so well developed cities, and maybe give the market a wrong signal that we have to keep these buildings, we cannot go forward, and so less attractive for the developers to have to make something really attractive, because for those buildings in those not so good cities, people don't want to live inside, they just keep empty. So that's my question and comments. Yeah.
Elena?
Can I answer? Actually, it's really challenging decision to be taken, because first of all, when we deal in growing city with uncertainty, we deal with shrinking cities with highest level of uncertainty. It's really difficult to predict. And also important note is that both decisions to preserve something, to maintain, and to demolish and construct something new, they are both producing negative impacts on environment, because anyway you should invest and waste resources, and it's really difficult to compare what is more wise, what is wiser solution. So of course, to promote economic growth, it's better to continue construction, something more attractive and something more beautiful maybe, but it is difficult maybe evaluate currently the future and which solution will be more intelligent. I don't know if I answered.
Any other question from the floor?
Well,
you have a question.
Yeah, there was, of course, the question, if I understood well, are the problems in Euro Delta of that order that you need this kind of additional layer to solve them? I would say yes, definitely. Given the polycentrality of that region. I mean, there are so many cities in that area, you know, that they cannot make the shift that is needed, each on their own, in a very competitive status. They are in a very competitive market, yes, and I have seen this firsthand with the main ports of Rotterdam, Antwerp, and then the smaller ones, Ghent, Zeebrugge. That of course there is competition for the same market, and very often in the past this resulted in negative externalities on the environment. Yet they start to understand that they cannot be longer played against each other to lower, let's say, the environmental regulations, for instance. Yes, and that's where they see, hey, we have to work together to be competitive together on a higher scale. So if you talk about, you know, where is the business in that, the business community, they are there, they are doing it. But they are doing it on their own, and it is not connected to the other layers, you know, of governance, of the way we redesign our cities. I see positive developments in inner cities. For instance, in my own hometown, Ghent, I was there now for a couple of days. Wonderful. It's now a cycling city instead of a city dominated by cars. But if I go from Ghent to Antwerp or Brussels, I am in a traffic jam all the way. Yes. And if I take the train, it takes longer than going by car. So it is not well organized between the cities. We are getting well organized in the city, but not between the cities. And that's where this collaboration needs to kick in at different scales, but also at this mega scale. So I don't think we are ready with that region yet. Yes.
If there are no other questions, I have one question for each one of you, and it's linked to tools, planning tools, basically. I would like to start with, firstly with Sabina, that she was proposing us 5 magic words: substitution, combination, unfolding, scaling up, and integrating. And my question is, these are outcomes of applied research, or we can consider to design an operational instruments for promoting nature-based solutions out of these 5 magic words. And that's the question for Sabina. And then the question for Elena is connected to, I was involved recently for the European Commission to propose a model for how to use cultural heritage, how to make plans for cultural heritage. How do you see this effort of the Commission to create a proper tool to make cultural heritage a driver of economic development of cities, so the renaissance in the post-pandemics? You see it positive, and which could be the main elements for designing this kind of new tool for promoting cultural heritage in the cities? Complicated question, but interesting to have your considerations. And finally, how realistic, Frank, is the possibility to have an overarching plan for this cross-border region? I mean, you talk about Euro Delta, but we are right now working with our company between Romania and Hungary. There are many other, the experience here of Alpe Adria between in this part of Europe, or the connection between Vienna and Bratislava. I remember that you were working that on. Manfred was working a lot on that. There are many experiments ongoing in Europe, and how realistic is to have operational tools? And that's the question for the 3 of you, the operational tools. Sabina first, Elena, and then Frank.
Thank you for the question, Pietro. I think that what I would like to consider the 5 words is actually targets. It's not the end of a research. I think it's the beginning of one. And not just research, because research builds to the solutions or to the possibility of integrating the solutions and so on. But what I think should come out of these targets is policy. You have strategy, European strategy, national strategy, city strategy. You have the targets. And then the next level below is the policy. It's not the instrument, the specific instrument that comes out. It's the design of a policy within the current context, which is plagued by lack of resources. It's plagued by the COVID restrictions and so on. I think the creative part is the policy making. You need to create as a city the right context for investment in green infrastructure, for investment in a shift in materials, for example. You can do that with a lot of money, but you can also do that with little money or no money, for example. You can fast-track permits for mass timber buildings. It doesn't cost you anything. But it's an attitude, and an attitude is a policy. It's what a city decides to do or decides not to do. And I think that's where we should look at, and that's what we should start. So in terms of instruments, I think we should start asking cities, what do you want, what do you not want in order to reach your targets, and start from there and try and find out what I'm looking at right now, for example, in Built-in-Wood and in other projects, is the possibility of creating a compendium of mass timber supporting policies. And this means regulation, this means cooperation mechanisms, this means urban policy, this means provisions in normative planning documents. We do not have this kind of information, but some examples are there. And what we have to do right now is to look for them, to put them together, and make a choice catalog out of it.
Yes, I would just add that I see when we talk about nature-based solution, a lot of spots examples, but I think that we have to make the step now towards the dimension of planning, and this is probably even what is happening with heritage, Elena, or what is your impression?
Actually, when we are talking about heritage as a driver for economy, we normally consider the touristic activities. And now, of course, in pandemic time, and after pandemic, if everything goes well, anyway, we should expect the coming back to the previous amount of tourism after several years, by 2023 and not before. And also the character of this tourism is changing, because first, it should be more local tourism, national tourism, and even cheaper tourism, because we also are entering in this economic crisis. But I think that not just tourism should be considered as the main economic activities related to heritage, because tourism also provoke and makes a lot of pressure on the heritage conservation. And we already have examples from Spain or Venice, which try to limit this touristic attractiveness of the city and to limit arrivals of tourism, because it's difficult to compensate the damages for these cities. Maybe the solution can be in a more flexible attitude to this heritage, possible adaptation for different use, also commercial use of this heritage, to make it alive, to not just conserve some moment fixed in the past, but try to give new use of this heritage, protected monuments, and also potential heritage.
Yes, just a consideration, I was impressed by, people defending the socialist heritage. That's interesting. We have to make always, and I disagree a little bit with what you said, Manfred, about, okay, we have to look at the business, but here we have something that is different, and maybe it's a lesson that we learned even from the pandemic, that planning is business, but even something different is the way of shaping, designing the public space. And probably some experiments like the Soviet one was very good in terms of public space, but not so good in terms of the object of architecture, the material. So this is still something that you have to look for. I mean, look how important was the public space, again, during the pandemic. And it's a question of business, but it's even a question of how we design the city and which kind of room we give to the public space. But now back to you, Frank. So do we have this tool to fight the poverty of territorialism?
Yeah.
So let's...
No, we don't have it. We don't have it. The European Union doesn't have it. It's still a blind spot, I would say, in European policy making, despite the EU territorial agenda. I don't think they can grasp, actually, this kind of place-based European plan making for regions like Eurodelta. And let me be clear, I don't think we have to go back to what I did in the 90s, making a plan for such a region. I think we are moving away from the plan making as such. A super city doesn't need a super plan developed by a bunch of super master planners. It needs a networked approach. It needs a shared vision, yes. It needs a principled approach, and it needs to be very clear what it doesn't want to become, yes. That is a unifying concept, easier than it would be to agree on what it could become, yes. If you look at the trend is gravity of power in a limited number of cities. Yes, that would actually throw away the cultural diversity of the Eurodelta and many similar areas. So you say we don't want to follow that trend of super concentration, but it will require more collaboration if we want to maintain that rich cultural diversity of many smaller cities together without completely changing into a swamp, as a matter of speaking, because the traffic between those small cities is completely jammed. So, yeah, no super plan, but a super network will be the answer, and I think that planners can transform themselves in network planners.